November 13th, 1899, Volume 3. Jesus Suffers in Seeing Creatures Suffer. Luisa offers herself to console him. This morning my adorable Jesus seemed to be restless. He would do nothing but come and go. Now he would spend time with me, and now, almost drawn by his most ardent love for creatures, he would go to see what they were doing, and with his whole self he would suffer with them from that which they were suffering, as if he himself, and not they, were taken by those sufferings. Several times I saw the confessor forcing Jesus by means of his priestly authority to make me suffer his pains, so as to be able to placate him. And while it seemed that he did not want to be placated, he would then show himself grateful, thanking wholeheartedly the one who was occupying himself with holding back his indignant arm, and so he would share with me now one suffering, now another. Oh, how tender and moving it was to see him in this state. He would make one's heart split with compassion. Quite a few times he told me, "Conform to my justice, for I can take no more." Ah, man is too ungrateful, and he almost forces me from all sides to chastise him. He himself snatches the chastisements from my hands. If you knew how much I suffer in making use of my justice. But it is man himself that uses violence on me. Ah, had I not done anything other than purchase his freedom at the price of my blood, he would still have to be grateful to me. But out of greater spite, he keeps inventing new ways to render my payment useless. While saying this, he was crying bitterly, and to console him I said to him, "My sweet good, do not afflict yourself. I see that your affliction is mostly because you feel forced to chastise the people. Ah, no, this will never be. If you are all for me, I want to be all for you. Therefore you will send the chastisements upon me. Here is the victim, always ready and at your disposal. You can make me suffer whatever you want, and so your justice will somehow be placated, and you will be relieved from the affliction you feel in seeing creatures suffer. My intention has always been this, not to conform to justice, because if man suffers, you would suffer more than he does." While I was saying this, our Queen Mamma came, and I remembered that as I had asked the confessor for the obedience to conform to justice, he had told me to ask the Most Holy Virgin whether she wanted me to conform. So I asked her, and she said to me, "No, no. But pray, my daughter, and in these days try as much as you can to keep him with you and to placate him, because many chastisements have been prepared." November 13th, 1900, Volume 4. She sees the many human miseries, the degradation and stripping of the Church, and the very degrading of priests. After going through several days of most bitter privation, having received Holy Communion, I saw 3 children within my interior. Their beauty and equality was such that all 3 of them seemed to be born of the same labor. My soul was surprised and stupefied in seeing so much beauty enclosed in the circle of my so miserable interior. And my stupefaction increased even more as I saw that these 3 children seemed to have many ropes of gold in their hands, and with these they bound themselves completely to me, and my heart completely to them. Then afterwards As if each one was taking his place, they began to discuss among themselves. But I could not understand, and I cannot find the words to repeat their most high language. I can only say that in a twinkling of an eye I saw the many human miseries, the degradation and stripping of the church, and the very degrading of priests who, instead of being light for the peoples, are darkness. All embittered by this sight, I said, "Most holy God, give peace to the church. Let her be given back what they have taken away from her. Do not allow the evil to laugh behind the back of the good." And as I was saying this, they said, "These are incomprehensible mysteries of God." Having said this, they disappeared, and I returned inside myself. November 13th, 1904, Volume 6. The creature would never have been worthy of divine love without a free will. As I continue in my usual state, my bitternesses keep increasing more and more because of the almost total privations and silence of my most holy and only good. All is shadow and flash that escape. I feel crushed and dazed. I don't understand anything any more, because the one who contains the light is far away from me, and is like a flash that, though it lights up, then becomes darker than before. The only and sole inheritance left to me is the divine will. Then, after struggling very much, I felt I could not go on any more. He came for a little and said to me, "My daughter, since I was man and God, my humanity could see, present, all sins, chastisements, and lost souls. It would have wanted to seize all this in one single point, destroy sins and chastisements, and save souls. It would have wanted to suffer not one day of passion, but all days, to be able to contain all these pains within itself and spare the poor creatures. But in spite of the fact that I would have wanted to and could have done it, because I could have destroyed the free will of creatures, and I would have destroyed these heaps of evils. Yet, what would have happened to man without his own merits, without his own will in operating good? What impression would he ever have made? Would he ever have been an object worthy of my creative wisdom? Certainly not. Oh, would he not have been like a foreign son in someone else's home, who, not having worked together with the other sons, has no right and no inheritance? This son is always full of blushes if he eats or drinks, because he knows that he has done not one favorable act to prove his love for that father. Therefore he can never be worthy of the love of that father for him. So the creature would never have been worthy of divine love without a free will. On the other hand, my humanity was not supposed to violate my creative wisdom. It was supposed to adore it, as it did adore it, and it resigned itself to receiving the voids of justice within itself, but not in the divinity, because these voids of divine justice are filled by the chastisements of this life, by hell, and by purgatory. So, if my humanity resigned itself to all this, would you perhaps want to surpass me and not receive any void of suffering upon yourself, in order not to let me chastise the people? Daughter, conform to me and remain peaceful. November 13th, 1915, Volume 11. In instituting the Most Holy Eucharist, before giving himself to creatures, Jesus wanted to receive himself. In the divine will, the soul must offer communion as Jesus did. After I had received Holy Communion, I thought to myself, how should I offer it in order to please Jesus? And he, always kind, told me, my daughter, if you want to please me, offer it as my own humanity did. Before giving communion to the others, I gave communion to myself, and I wanted to do this in order to give to the Father the complete glory of all the communions of creatures, and to enclose within me all the reparations for all the sacrileges, for all the offenses that my humanity would receive in the sacrament. Since I enclosed the divine will, I enclosed all the reparations of all times. And since I received myself, I received myself worthily. And since all the works of the creatures were divinized by my humanity, I wanted to seal the communions of the creatures with my communion. Otherwise, how could the creature receive a God? It was my humanity that opened this door to the creatures, giving them merit to receive me. You, my daughter, do it in my will. Unite it to my humanity. In this way you will enclose everything, and I will find in you the reparations of all, the reward for everything, and my satisfaction. Even more, I will find in you another me. November 13th, 1927, Volume 23. How the Word was in the center of his humanity, and how he operated. How there is a great difference between the reigning of the divine will and the sanctity of the saints, even though there were miracles. I was following my round in the divine volition, and as I arrived at the acts it did in the humanity of our Lord, my sweet Jesus, moving in my interior, told me, my daughter, the divine Word in my humanity was present as center of life within it. We were inseparable, the Word and my humanity. But since my humanity had its limits, while the Word was without limits, immense and infinite, I could not restrict the whole endless light of the Word within it. This light overflowed outside in such a way that, overflowing from the center of my humanity, its rays came out from my hands, from my feet, from my mouth, from my heart, from my eyes, from every part of my humanity, in such a way that all my operating flowed within this light, and more than solar rays, it invested everything and traced all the acts of creatures in order to give its acts, so that their acts, invested by its light, might take the form of its acts, and fused together might acquire the value, the beauty of its acts. But what was not the sorrow of my humanity in seeing its acts being rejected by creatures within the very light of the eternal Word, preventing the transformation he wanted to make in creatures. Each of his rejected acts was a sorrow, and each act of the creatures converted into bitterness and offense for my humanity. How hard it is wanting to do good, doing it, and finding no one who receives this good. This sorrow still lasts, because everything that my humanity did in the light of the eternal Word exists and will always exist, and is always in the act of doing what once was done. And it lies as though in ambush, waiting for the creature to receive the transmission of its acts, so that one may be the act, one the value, one the will, one the love on both sides. And only by the reigning of my fiat can the operating I did in redemption have its total fulfillment. Because with the light of my fiat, creatures will remove the blindfold, and will let all the good that the eternal Word came to do within my humanity for love of creatures flow within themselves. And while he was saying this, I saw my sweet Jesus with so much light coming out from within him as to invest everything and every one. Then I continued my round in the divine Fiat, and while accompanying with my I love you all the prodigies it had done in the saints, patriarchs, and prophets of the Old Testament, as well as those after his coming upon earth, to ask for his divine kingdom in the midst of creatures by virtue of all these its acts, I thought to myself, if this holy volition has done so many prodigies in all these saints, is this not then its reigning, at least in these saints so prodigious? But while I was thinking of this, my beloved Jesus, moving in my interior, told me, my daughter, there is no good that has not come out of my divine will, but there is a great difference between its reigning in the creatures and the releasing of an act from within itself, communicating it to creatures. As for example, with Abraham, it released an act of heroism, and I had the man heroic in the sacrifice. With Moses, an act of power, and he was the prodigious man. With Samson, an act of strength, and he was the strong man. To the prophets, it revealed what regarded the future Redeemer, and they were men prophets. And so with all the others who distinguished themselves as prodigious and of uncommon virtue, according to the act that my divine will released, and if they gave their adhesion and correspondence, so did they receive the good of its act. However, this is not reigning, my daughter, nor does this form the kingdom of my will. In order to form it, it takes not just one act, but the continuous act that it possesses. This is what it wants to give to creatures in order to form its kingdom. Its continuous act of power, of happiness, of light, of sanctity, of unreachable beauty. What my Fiat is by nature, it wants to render creatures by virtue of its continuous act that contains all possible and imaginable goods. Would you say that a king reigns only because he has made a law or has given a good to his people? Certainly not. True reigning is to form the life of the peoples with all the laws, giving a decorous regime befitting, upright, and just for their lives, giving them all the necessary means so that nothing may be lacking for their good. In order to reign, the king should have his life in the midst of the peoples, and make his will and his goods one with them, in such a way that the king should form the life of the people, and the people the life of the king. Otherwise, it is not true reigning. This is the reigning of my will, to render itself inseparable from the children of its kingdom, to give them everything it possesses to the point of overflowing, so as to have children happy and holy of its very happiness and holiness. Now, from this it can be seen how, in spite of the so many prodigies that saints, prophets, and patriarchs have done, they have not formed my kingdom in the midst of creatures, nor have they made known its value, or the great good that my will possesses, or what it can do and wants to give, and the purpose of its kingdom, because its continuous act, its permanent life, was missing in them, and therefore, not knowing it in depth, they occupied themselves with other things concerning my glory and their good, and they put my will aside, waiting for a more favorable time, when the paternal goodness would please to first make known, and then to give, a good so great, and a kingdom so holy, that they would not even dream of. Therefore be attentive, and continue your flight in the divine fiat. November 13th, 1932, Volume 31, Industries and Traffic of Jesus in the Sacrament. Who forms his paradise, and who forms his purgatory? I felt completely sunk in my nothingness, and feeling deprived of my sweetest Jesus, I felt my nothingness emptied of his life, without support, and without strength. And having received Holy Communion, I felt that I had nothing to offer Jesus, and I felt oppressed and embittered. And he, compassionating me, told me, "My daughter, courage. With your Jesus, your nothingness is everything, and can give me everything, because you must know that I do not descend only when you receive me in the sacrament, but I descend with all my works. And as I make you the owner of my sacramental life, so I make you owner of all my works. Therefore, if you want, you have much to give me, because you have my works in your power. Even more because my sacramental life that you receive in the Holy Host is surrounded by the acts that my humanity did when I received myself in instituting the Most Holy Sacrament, and surrounded by the acts that my celestial Mamma did when she received me sacramentally, and surrounded by all the acts of those who live of my will, because these acts are inseparable from me, and remain incorporated with me as part of my very life. Therefore you can give me everything, because they serve to cover your misery, to supplement your love, almost in order to not make you be ashamed that, coming into you, you would not have anything to give me. On the contrary, as you use them in order to give them to me and be able to please me and love me by means of these acts, they bilocate and become your acts and my acts, acts of the Sovereign Queen and of the souls who live of my will, in a way that I, instead of having one, have two, and my sacramental life remains surrounded by double acts, by double love, and by greater glory. These are my traffics that I make when I communicate myself to souls. I give of mine in order to have double from them, and thus my industry puts in traffic my very sacramental life in order to have the exchange of it. But alas, how many do not make use of it, and they remain not having, nor do they know what to give me, and I remain without new cortege, fasting for their acts and with the sorrow of not being able to be industrious in my loving traffics. You will not do this to me, because if I come, it is not only to come, but it is also because I want to give and receive myself, for as much as the creature is able. This forms my satisfaction, my contentment, and my paradise in the most holy sacrament. To give myself and receive nothing from them forms my purgatory in my little prison of the sacramental host, purgatory that human ingratitude forms for me. Therefore be attentive, and with courage and without any reserve, give me of mine and all of yourself to me, so that I can say, I have given her everything, and she has given me everything. So you will form my contentment and my traffic of love. After this I was doing my usual round in the acts of the divine will, and it seemed to me that all created things invited me, one after the other, to make themselves known as works of the omnipotent Fiat, in which my little exchange of love was awaited. And for however little it wanted it, it claimed it, in order to obtain its purpose for having put forth the whole of creation. And while I sought to follow the divine will, my lovable Jesus, repeating his brief little visit, told me, "My blessed daughter, everything that our paternal goodness has operated in creation and redemption has not yet received the exchange from the creature. And the reason is because our purpose for which creation was created was that man would complete our will in everything. That same will operating in creation must obtain its continuous operating act in the creature in a way that the echo of one would form the same echo in the other, so as to form one alone. But my operating virtue of my will remains alone with all of its magnificence, power, wisdom, and beauty. It remains in the celestial spheres, but in man it is repressed, and thus he does not have my will operating in him. He does not have the hearing to listen to the echo of its operative virtue in creation. Therefore, not having obtained the purpose, our works are without exchange. The purpose forms the exchange of whatever work, little or great, that is done, and you must be convinced that no one, as much in the divine order as in the human, works without purpose, and in order to obtain his exchange. The purpose can be called the beginning and life of a work, the exchange, the fulfillment. Oh, how many works would not have beginning if it were not for their purpose, and would be left halfway if it were not for the certainty of exchange. The exchange makes one sustain unheard of sacrifices, and gives excessive heroism to God and to creatures. Now, if my divine will does not form its kingdom in souls, and they do not give it the freedom to let it dominate with its creative and operative virtue, true exchange will not be given to us. And therefore we are always waiting, and we see our most beautiful works halfway and without the fulfillment of our purpose, such that there lacks the most beautiful thing, the most important act. There lacks the purpose for which all things were created. See, therefore, how necessary it is that the kingdom of my will come. Even more, because not having had the true exchange, our creative work has remained as suspended, and has not been able to proceed in the work of creation, because it has been established that from the external creation that they possess must follow the internal creation in the depth of souls. And this could be done if my will had the prime place, the freedom to operate in the human will. And not having it, it cannot proceed in its creative work. It remains hindered, not being able to create in them the new heavens, stars, suns, and so forth, as exchange for what it gave them in the creation of all things. And not able to proceed in our works, not able to continue what we have established to do in creatures by virtue of our will. How can we be reciprocated if we still have not finished doing what we want, and have not fulfilled the work of creation begun so many centuries ago? The work of creation included altogether what my Fiat must do in all creatures, in order to be able to say our work is completed. And if our volition has not yet done everything that it wants to do, how can it be said that I have completed my work, even less been reciprocated for all that has been done? So, when we obtain the purpose that in all things the creature does our will and lives in it, and she has the purpose of living of our will, and of letting it rain so as to give it the field for the magnificence of its works, then, when the purpose of one will be that of the other, then can we be able to receive the true exchange for everything that we have done for love of creatures. Therefore be attentive, and always forward in my will. November 13th, 1938, Volume 36. How the truths on the divine will form the regime, the law, the fierce army. The knowledge will open eyes for the possession of such a good. The seal of the Most Holy Trinity as a sign to know whether we live in the divine will. My flight in the divine volition continues. I cannot do without it. I would feel as if I myself were killing my own soul. Heaven is watching me, and how could I live without my life? Then I was thinking to myself about the truths that Jesus told me about his divine will. But I wanted to raise doubts, not understanding well. So I said to myself, how is it possible that one can reach such a point by living in the divine volition? And my beloved Jesus, surprising me all goodness, said, My blessed daughter, do not be surprised. My will has the power to let the creature reach every place as long as she remains within it. Now you must know that its kingdom will be formed and founded on the truths I have manifested. The more truths I manifest, the more sumptuous, beautiful, majestic, and superabundant in goods and joys this kingdom will be. My truths will form the regime, the laws, the food, the fierce army, the defense, and the very life of those who will live in it. Each of my truths will have its own distinct office. One will be the master, one the most loving father, one the most tender mother, who carries her daughter on her lap to protect her from every danger, rocking her in her arms, feeding her with her love, clothing her in light. In sum, every truth will be the bearer of a special good. See how this kingdom of my will be. I have been talking so much about it. I feel sorry when you are not attentive enough to write everything, because you will cause an additional good to be missing, since creatures will enjoy according to their knowledge. Knowledge will reveal the life, the light, and the good for them to possess. It is almost impossible to possess a good without knowing it. It would be as if they had no eyes to see, no intelligence to understand, no hands to work, no feet to walk, and no heart to love. On the other hand, the first thing knowledge does is to give them eyes, to prevent them from being like the poor blind. It lets them look, understand, and desire the good and the life it wants to give them. Furthermore, the knowledge of my truths becomes itself the actor and spectator, transmitting its own life to the creature. Now you must know that the acts done in my will are inseparable, although distinct among themselves, distinct in their sanctity, in their beauty, in love, and in wisdom. They will carry the seal of the Most Holy Trinity, for while the divine persons are distinct among each other, they remain inseparable. One is the will, one the sanctity, one the beauty, and so forth. In the same way, these acts will be inseparable yet distinct, enclosing within themselves the seal of the Supreme Holy Trinity, one and three, three and one. Even more, these acts will possess it as their own life. They will be the greatest glory for us and the whole of heaven, in seeing in them our divine lives being multiplied for as many acts performed in our will. Then I was thinking to myself, how can one know whether he is living in the divine will? My sweet Jesus added, My daughter, it's easy to know it. You must know that when my fiat reigns in the soul, it keeps its act in continuous operation. It cannot be present and not do something. It is life, and it must breathe, move, palpitate, make itself heard. It must have its primary operating act, so the creature feels its empire and follows its acts almost continuously in the divine will. Therefore, continuation is a sure sign that one lives in it. With this continuation, he feels the need of divine breathing, motion, and attitude. Therefore, if he stops his continuous acts, he feels as though he is missing life, motion, and everything else. Soon he restarts his continuous acts because he knows that it would cost too much to do otherwise. It would cost him divine life, and one who has possessed it can hardly let it go. Now, what is this action of the creature in the divine will? It is the sequence of my life and of my will in the creature, because only my will has the virtue of being unceasing in its continuous acts. Otherwise, if it could be said so, everyone and everything would remain as if paralyzed and with no life. But this cannot be. Now, the creature does not possess by herself this virtue of operating continuously, but when united with my will, she has the virtue, the strength, the will, and the love to do it. How much she can change things! In fact, the creature who lets herself be carried and possessed by it can make such changes that she no longer recognizes herself, if she even retains a distant memory of her past life. There's also another sign. When my will sees the soul being disposed, it first embalms her will, her pains, with an air of peace. Then it forms its throne. Therefore, one who lives in my will possesses a strength that is never extinguished, a love that does not love anybody, but truly loves all in God. To how many sacrifices she exposes herself for all, and for each one in particular. Poor daughter, she is the true martyr and victim of all. Oh, how many times in seeing her suffering, I look at her with so much tenderness and compassion, and to cheer her up I say, My daughter, you received my same destiny. Poor daughter, courage, your Jesus loves you more. And in feeling more loved by me, she smiles in the sufferings and abandons herself in my arms. My daughter, to experience, to possess what my will can do, creatures need to be inside of it. Otherwise, they won't understand the thing. End of November 13th. Fiat.